Breakups are already crazy hard as it is. Letting go of someone who was such an integral part of your life, someone who knew your routines, your coffee order, your childhood stories. I mean, it's someone whose name was like stitched into the fabric of your everyday language. We, us, our plans, our future, that kind of thing. And there's so much advice out there on how to get over a breakup. People would say, go no contact or delete all the photos or hit the gym or date someone new or maybe focus on yourself. But there's a layer of healing that I don't think we talk about nearly enough. And that is healing your relationship with yourself. Because when you've been in a relationship for a while, you don't just lose the person when it ends, you lose the version of yourself that existed inside of that dynamic. You lose the rhythm of being a unit. You lose that comfort of a shared identity. And if you don't address that, what can end up happening is that you kind of get over the breakup, but you still haven't found yourself again. So you're functioning and you're moving on, but something feels slightly misaligned, like you're still untethered. And sometimes it's even deeper than that. Sometimes in relationships, we have these tiny micro abandonments of the self. We silence ourselves to keep the peace. And we convince ourselves that everything is fine when it actually really isn't. And maybe we shrink a little or we override our intuition. We tell ourselves stories that help us stay in that relationship instead of showing us the truth. And then when the relationship pulls apart, we're not just grieving that person, we're left with this uncomfortable question. Did I abandon myself? And if I did, how do I learn to trust myself again? How do I become a safe space for myself again? Because healing your relationship with yourself after a breakup isn't just about learning how to be alone again. Yes, that's an important component of it. But it's also about forgiving yourself for the moments you compromised your own truth. It's about rebuilding self trust. It's about rediscovering your individuality, not in a performative way or in a way that is hyper independent, but rediscovering your individuality in a way that is grounded and rooted. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about all of it: how to sit with the loneliness without rushing to replace it and fill it with someone new, how to rebuild self trust in small, practical ways, and also, importantly, how to forgive yourself for what you tolerated, how to reclaim who you are outside of this us dynamic that isn't there anymore. And right at the end, I want to briefly touch on something else too: how to not lose yourself while you're in a relationship in the first place. But that might be an entirely different episode on its own. But for now, this episode is about coming home to yourself after the heartbreak, after the unraveling and the silence. This is about learning to say, yes, they might have left, but I won't leave me. Welcome back to Lost and Found, the space where we're figuring things out in real time together. I'm your host, Carmen Jeet, and come sit with me for a while. I'm coming to you from Bali right now. It's a rainy season, but today is actually quite sunny. The air smells a little bit like wet earth and frangipani from yesterday's rain. I'm sitting here talking to you, looking out onto this beautiful little garden, and I'm wondering, where are you right now? Where are these words reaching you? Are you on a walk along the Thames in London with your hands tucked in your coat pockets? Or are you on a beach in Cape Town with the wind tangling your hair? Or maybe you're pushing a trolley in a supermarket in North Carolina? Or you're laying on your bedroom floor in Bombay staring at the ceiling? I don't know. And that's kind of the crazy thing about the internet, isn't it? How our words get lives of their own and how they travel further than we even can. How something said in a rainy corner in Bali can maybe land in someone else's quiet moment on the other side of the world. And I like to believe that these words reach the people who need them most. So wherever you are, however you're listening, just know that you are so welcome here. I really, really appreciate you spending this time with me. Today's episode is for anyone who has gone through a breakup and realized that the hardest part isn't just losing the other person, it's feeling like you've lost yourself a little bit too. So let's start here. Point number one: before you can start the rebuilding, you need to grieve the loss. Grieve the relationship and the version of yourself that you were inside of that relationship. When we think about grief after a breakup, we usually think about grieving the person. We grieve their voice, their laughter, And also these routines and rituals that we shared with them. And that kind of that couple's shared language. But there's another layer to the grief. You're also grieving the version of yourself that existed inside of that relationship. And that can be really disorientating because relationships reshape us. They change our rhythms, they influence our habits, they affect how we see ourselves. And maybe in that relationship, you became softer, or maybe you became more anxious, or more secure, or more accommodating, or more expressive. You become a certain version of yourself in response to another person. And I always think of relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but relationships with friends too. I think of it as Venn diagrams. Imagine it this way. We humans are circles. Everything inside your circle represents you. So that includes your hobbies, your taste in music, the books you love, your quirks, your insecurities, the way you laugh, the way you argue, your values, dreams, everything. Your weird little rituals. That's in your circle, okay? That's your circle. And every single person we meet is their own circle too, fully formed, with their own inner world. Now, the way we relate to people is through the parts where our circles overlap. But we almost never meet someone whose circle is exactly the same size and shape as ours, right? They don't fully overlap. They can't. We're not clones of each other. Nobody's exactly alike. But the parts that do overlap, what happens? Those are the parts that get highlighted, emphasized, activated. If you both love adventure, that is the part of you that will expand when you're with that person. If you both love having deep conversations, that part of you strengthens. Or if you both bond over humor, that's the version of you that becomes louder and more prominent when you spend time with that person. And if you spend a long time with one person, like when you're in a relationship, the overlapping section of your circles becomes the place that you live in. That part of you is the one that becomes heightened and practiced and reinforced daily. And the other parts of your circle, it's not that they disappear, it's kind of like they go dormant. And it's not because you're performing for this person or you're just putting one version of yourself forward, but because humans are relational, we're responsive, we adapt. That's why sometimes you feel like a completely different person with different people. With one friend, maybe you feel like you're silly and chaotic and dramatic, but with another one, you're philosophical. But with a partner, you might be softer or more nurturing or maybe more ambitious. That doesn't mean you're inconsistent. It just means that different overlaps activate different parts of you. And here's where breakups get really disorientating. When that one overlap, the one that you've been living in for months or for years, suddenly disappears, it can feel like you've lost a piece of yourself because you were inhabiting that shared space for so long. And so part of the healing is to remember that your circle is still whole. And the parts that went quiet are still there. The creative part, the independent part, the playful part, the ambitious part, the part that doesn't even like the same music or movies that they did. It's all still there. You didn't suddenly become someone else with this person. You just emphasized one section for a while. And now you get to rediscover the rest. And yes, feeling like you've lost a part of yourself and feeling really lost and disorientated after a breakup is normal. You will wonder, who am I without that we? Who am I now without someone reflecting myself back at me? And this is where people panic, right? Because it feels like you've lost more than just your partner. You've lost a sense of identity. You've lost a big chapter of your life. You've lost kind of like an iteration of who you are. And instead of trying to push past that loss and that feeling of identity crisis or pretend that it didn't matter, I actually think that we need to properly grieve it. Grieve the future that you imagined. Grieve the plans that won't happen with that person. Grieve the version of you who believed that it would work. And allow yourself to say, without shame, that mattered, that changed me, and that version of me was real. Because if you don't consciously grieve who you were inside that dynamic, you might unconsciously try to recreate it with someone else, or you might reject parts of yourself that actually deserve that compassion. So healing your relationship with yourself starts with honoring who you were, even if that version may be tolerated too much or loved too hard or stayed too long. We're not going to shame that person. We're going to thank them. They did the best they could with the information and capacity they had at the time. And now, gently, we begin the process of rediscovering who we are outside of that container. Not by erasing who you were or the memories, not by erasing what was, but by integrating it. So that's point one. We grieve. We honor the version of ourselves that existed in that overlap. But once we've done that, we have to move into something a little more confronting. Okay, so point number two. Identify the places where you abandoned yourself, and then you begin rebuilding that self-trust. So I went through a really, really bad breakup about a year and a half ago, after a relationship that made me feel like I completely lost my power and my sense of self. The relationship itself was not good. It wasn't healthy. And it made me feel really powerless nearing the end. And I think the reason that breakup really messed me up for a while is because in the relationship, I felt like I really lost myself. I completely abandoned myself. So in the aftermath of the breakup, I just felt so lost and I felt disorientated. And I had to face the fact that in the relationship, there were so many little micro abandonments of self. And that looks like when the moment you felt hurt by something they said, you tell yourself, oh no, I'm being too sensitive. Or the time you wanted to bring something up but decided it wasn't worth attention, so you just stay silent. Or that boundary that you knew you had to keep but convinced yourself, no, I'm asking for too much. It's when your intuition is telling you that something's not right here, but you say to yourself, don't overthink it. And all those moments, all those times when you abandoned yourself and your intuition and you kind of betrayed yourself, those moments add up. And again, this is not about blaming yourself, it's becoming aware. And it's also important to know that self abandonment doesn't come from a place of weakness. I want you to know that. It comes from fear of losing them, fear of conflict, fear of being too much, fear of being alone. So we bend into a shape of ourselves that is willing to stay, or that we think will please this other person enough for them to stay. And then when the relationship ends, what we're left with isn't just the heartbreak, it's that erosion of self trust. Because somewhere inside, in that relationship, you knew things that you didn't act on, and then it feels like you didn't protect yourself. So healing your relationship with yourself means repairing that rupture. It means saying, okay, I see where I left myself. And instead of punishing myself for it, I'm going to start choosing myself again, rebuild the self-trust. And how do you rebuild self-trust? It's not rebuilt in one big dramatic moment. It's rebuilt in what I like to call little integrity reps, little integrity repetitions. So what do I mean by that? It's like when you say you don't want to text them and you don't. Or you say you're going to wake up and go for a walk and you actually do that. Or you notice something feels off with someone new, and instead of just overriding that feeling, you sit with it or you bring it up with them or you walk away when you need to. It's those moments, those small promises kept consistently. That's how you slowly start to feel safe with yourself again. Because the goal isn't to become someone who is hyper independent and someone who says, I don't need anyone. It's to know deeply that even when you love someone, you will not disappear for them. That even when you're scared, you won't override your own truths. That you are someone you can rely on. And when you become someone you can rely on, yes, breakups still hurt, but they don't shatter your identity. Okay, point number 3. This is so important. So once you've identified the moments where you overrode yourself, the boundaries that you didn't keep or the intuition that you ignored, the next step is not punishment, it is forgiveness. And this is hard. Forgiving yourself is one of the hardest things that you'll have to do in your life, but it's also one of the most important. Okay, so you forgive yourself because you actually can't go anywhere from there until you do. And if I can be honest with you, during my last breakup, I went through a phase where I was just filled with so much anger. Anger towards that person, yes, but also a lot of anger towards myself for abandoning myself, for staying through so much when deep down I had known for a long time that this wasn't healthy anymore. And I was angry at myself for seeing the signs and still choosing hope. And all of that self directed anger almost became louder than the heartbreak at one point. It was like I was replaying every moment, thinking, how did I let that happen? Why did I say I knew better? And I realized something. If I kept speaking to myself like that, I was just going to continue with the abandonment. So I started doing something that felt almost silly at first. So every time that I went through a shame spiral, I would consciously interrupt it and I would say, I forgive myself for staying longer than I should have. I forgive myself for not knowing what I know now. I forgive myself for trying to make it work. And I repeated that to myself over and over again. And I'm not going to pretend that I meant it immediately. Sometimes I said it like through gritted teeth, and sometimes I didn't believe myself at all. But that repetition is what matters because the brain listens to what you repeat. And slowly, very slowly, that repetition started to soften something inside of me. And the resentment I had towards myself began to loosen a bit. And that's when I started understanding that forgiveness isn't about excusing the behavior. It's about refusing to turn yourself into the villain of your own growth story. You did not have the wisdom you have today back then. You did not have today's clarity back then. You made the best decisions you could with the emotional capacity and information you had at the time. And if you can't forgive yourself for being human, you will stay stuck in that chapter. So say it and say it out loud if you need to. I forgive myself for staying. I forgive myself for not leaving sooner. I forgive myself for loving the way I did. Even if you don't believe it yet, one day you will. And that is where the relationship with yourself starts to mend. Okay, point number 4. Learn to sit with the loneliness instead of rushing to replace it. So after a breakup, the silence can feel really unbearable. It feels like an aching hole right in the center of your life, and you just can't move past it. I know. You feel their absence everywhere. You wake up and there's no notifications on your phone, or their side of the bed is empty, and there's no one to message about that funny thing that happened. And because of that, everything else in your life feels like it's just falling flat. It almost feels like your whole life is pulsating with the loss of that person. And what most of us want to do instinctively is to fill it. Go out, download Tinder, flirt with someone new, keep busy, post on Instagram about the clubs that I'm going to make them think that I'm fine and I'm having a great time. Just stay distracted. That's what we instinctively try to do. Anything but sit in the space of that loneliness. But there's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone is that feeling of space, and abandonment is the belief that you are not safe. You feel like someone left you, and in that loneliness, you are not safe. Someone abandoned you. And if you immediately rush to replace this person, if you want to fill the space, then you never learn the difference between solitude and abandonment. You never learn that you can be alone without being abandoned. And when you sit in that space, that's where your relationship with yourself deepens. When you wake up on a Sunday and instead of reaching for your phone, you just sit in the quiet, or you go for a walk, or you journal. And when you feel that ache, that gut punch, and you let it exist without trying to numb it. Yeah, it's going to suck at first. I'm not going to romanticize it. Truly. Real heartbreak, it's not pretty. It's not poetic. Genuinely, real heartbreak, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So I see you. I know what you're going through right now. Yes, there are times when that loneliness might feel physical, like a weight in your chest, and your instinct might be to make it go away as quickly as possible. But every time you don't run from it, every time you sit with it, something small will shift, and eventually, it will stop feeling like emptiness and it will feel like space. And that space will become something beautiful, space to hear your own thoughts again, space to rediscover what you actually like, space to notice what you want, not in reaction to someone else, but independently. Loneliness when you don't resist it, becomes clarity. When you don't resist the loneliness becomes solitude, and in the solitude, you can find clarity. It becomes the place where your own voice gets louder again. And this is the paradox. The more comfortable you become being alone, the less likely you are to abandon yourself in the next relationship. Because you no longer choose someone out of fear of silence. Now you can choose them out of alignment. And that changes everything. Because the moment you rush to fill the loneliness, you're just going to pick someone out of fear of not being alone, out of fear of facing yourself and facing that ache. And so you just fill it with anyone and you keep repeating the same bad patterns. And you never truly love someone the way they deserve to be loved. And you don't invite the kind of love into your life that you deserve. But when you first learn to be okay with yourself, then the addition of someone new, of that love and that presence, becomes something that is beneficial for both of you. It adds to your life. It's not filling some kind of black hole that you're scared of facing. But now, just to be clear, when I say sit with the loneliness, I do not mean lock yourself in your room and spiral for 3 months straight. No, healing is not isolation. So go out, see your friends, let people love you. Let them take you out for coffee. Let them drag you on a walk when you don't feel like moving. Let yourself laugh in the middle of all the heaviness. Because there's something incredibly regulating about being around safe people and remembering that the world is bigger than just this one person. But there's the balance, right? Don't remove yourself from the world entirely. And also don't force yourself to perform joy when you genuinely don't have the energy for it. So if you're exhausted, rest. If you're overwhelmed, cancel the plans. If you need a quiet night, take the quiet night. This isn't about proving how well you're handling it. It's about listening to yourself again and what you need. And on the other side of that, also be careful of constantly trying to distract yourself, right? So there's a difference between healthy connection and running away from dealing with your problems. So like going out every night, jumping into rebounds, filling every second with noise, that doesn't mean you're skipping the bad part. I think that's a big issue we have. We think that, okay, the breakup sucks now. So for 2 weeks, I'm just going to go out. I'm going to skip this part where I feel so awful and then I'll be fine. But that's not how it works. The big suckiness of a breakup will not go away unless you actually feel it. You cannot outrun that grief. If you repress it now, it will just resurface later and it will be louder and heavier and messier. And then sometimes it will show up in the next relationship, maybe in ways that you don't even connect back to this other relationship and the stuff that you repressed. Because pain that isn't processed gets stored. And eventually it asks to be felt. So find the rhythm and feel it. And then go out and see your friends and then cry. And then go for dinner and then sit in the quiet. And then let yourself be held by community. Healing isn't about choosing between solitude and connection. It's about moving between these two spaces consciously. And when you learn that you can sit alone without collapsing, and you can connect with others without disappearing into them, that's when you start to feel whole again. And you will feel whole again. I know right now it feels like the end of the world. It feels like you'll never get over this and you'll never feel normal again. But I promise you, you will. Breakups have been happening to everyone for the whole history of the world. And yeah, does that make your particular breakup any less painful? No, it doesn't. But maybe it can give you a little bit of perspective. Many people before you have survived this, and so will you. Okay, great. Now for point number 5, let's move into something a bit more constructive and embodied. Reclaim your individuality in small, tangible ways. Because after a breakup, especially if you were in a relationship for a really long time, it's easy to feel like you don't even know what you like anymore because your weekends used to look a certain way and your routines were intertwined with this person and all of your decisions were filtered through us. And now it's just you, and that can feel blank. But instead of seeing that blankness as emptiness, I want you to see it as a kind of a reset. And this is the part where it gets exciting. You can finally start asking again, What do I actually enjoy? What music do I like when no one else is in the car? What do my mornings look like when I don't have to consider anyone else's rhythm? What do I want my Sundays to feel like? And it can be small, like waking up a little bit earlier or a little bit later, or returning to a hobby that you abandoned while with them. Or it could be bigger, like dyeing your hair purple or going on a solo trip. You have the freedom now. You can do something completely new. And I think it's really good when you're in this phase to experience yourself in a new context, one that isn't linked with them, but one that is just yours. This is where you expand your circle again. Remember the Venn diagram? So when that overlapping section disappears, you don't shrink, you widen, and you start to revisit the parts of yourself that went quiet. Maybe you start writing again, or you travel, or you start training for something that you've always wanted to train for, or maybe you cook meals just the way you like them. These aren't distractions, they are reintroductions. You are reintroducing yourself to yourself. And the beautiful thing about this stage is that it doesn't feel explosive. It feels kind of steady. And you start to notice moments where you think, oh, I like this version of me. I feel like myself again. Not because you're back to who you were before the relationship, but because now you've integrated it. You've learned from it. You've grown from it. And now you're building something that feels rooted and not reactive. And this is how you stop defining yourself by who you lost, and you start defining yourself by who you are becoming. I get goosebumps just from talking about this. Wow. Okay, final point. Now we go into touching on something that is actually supposed to be an episode by itself, and that is how to not lose yourself in the next relationship. How do you love deeply without disappearing into someone else? Because the goal with all of this isn't to become guarded and never love again. It's not to become hyper independent and emotionally unavailable and say things like, I don't need anyone. That's not the goal. I think the goal is to stay connected to yourself while being connected to someone else. And that, I've learned, requires something very simple, but it can be very uncomfortable. And that is that you have to keep checking in with yourself in real time, not 6 months later, not when the resentment towards this other person has already started to build or things are falling apart. No, you need to check in with yourself now in real time. And that looks like asking yourself, am I shrinking here? Am I saying yes when I mean no? Am I explaining away behavior that doesn't actually sit right with me? Am I still doing the things that make me feel like me? Am I keeping my hobbies, my friendships? And the biggest one, if this ended tomorrow, would I still recognize myself? Because the healthiest relationships are not two halves merging into one. They are two whole people overlapping, two full circles choosing to connect and not collapse into each other. And that means keeping your friendships, keeping your hobbies, keeping your rituals, your opinions, your voice. It means being brave enough to say, this doesn't feel good to me, even if it risks tension. It means trusting that the right person will not require you to disappear. And if they do, they're not the right person for you. But again, that's a whole conversation on its own. For now, I just want to leave you with this. The work you're doing after a breakup isn't just about healing from that person. It's about becoming someone who will not abandon themselves in love again. And that's where the power lies. Damn. Okay, before saying goodbye, I want to acknowledge you and what you are feeling right now one more time. Because breakups are fucking brutal. There's no getting around that. But when you get through the suck, and you will eventually get to the other side, I promise, you will have the gift of reinvention, of freedom, space to transform and remember yourself, or maybe meet a new version of yourself. You get to spend time with yourself, you get to know yourself from scratch and grow into someone who is ready to love again without losing themselves. And the fact that you're listening to this episode, the fact that you just sat through all of this, proves to me that you care enough about yourself to want to heal, to want to reconnect with yourself. And that's already a beautiful thing. It's the first step. Okay, I'm going to leave you with your thoughts now. I want to urge you to journal about whatever this episode has brought up for you. or maybe talk into a tape recorder or into your pillow or whatever is your vibe, whatever feels right. But do something with what you heard and felt here today, okay? And if this episode meant something to you, please leave a rating and a review or a comment. It would mean the world to me, and it really helps the podcast reach the people who need to hear it most. Or maybe send it to someone who's going through something similar and who needs to hear this. Let's chat again next week, and until then, I'm sending you all the love, all the good energy. See you on Thursday.